family are back at their place just over the line in North Pasadena after the evacuation order was lifted. The house survived, but he's wondering about the nature of this place.
It's a matter of building the political pressure to move policy to reflect the needs of the community.
Chavez and his partners set up on their driveway to get N95 masks and other donations to neighbors in need. And you can see other people-powered mutual aid stations that have popped up in parking lots nearby.
I just saw a flyer for a gathering, a protest with the title of Altadena's Not for Sale.
What we know doesn't work in these situations is when communities simply told what's happening and they're not at the center of the decision making, when everyone's kind of racing toward getting back to some past state without thinking about some of the consequences of the future.
Sam Carter works on urban transformation as founding principal of Resilient Cities Catalyst. He says taking the time to build resilience, he says, can yield returns that include cold, hard cash, regarding something I very much worry about when planning my own rebuild. Will we ever be able to get insurance again?
What are those community scale actions that could actually shift the risk profile and could actually change the way insurers look at these communities and might actually shift risk to an extent that insurance could actually go down in some of these communities?
I'll be on this beat for a long time. In Altadena, California, I'm David Brancaccio for Marketplace.
And in New York, I'm Sabri Benishore with the Marketplace Morning Report. From 8 p.m., American Public Media.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. SJC Cultural Events presents indie rock band Modest Mouse at the St. Augustine Amphitheater on June 11th. More info at theamp.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schindler, and on today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. A Republican smackdown of Florida's once all-powerful governor. The mayor and the city council clash over trash and who controls the power of the purse. A new county jail gains traction, even as a budget deficit looms. Pastors offer gang members safe passage, and JEA's former CEO reports to prison. We'll talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists on our Friday Week in Review. Later, in an age of fast and digital, we'll tell you about a local photography group that's going slow and analog. Join the conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937 or email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. It's all ahead this hour.
Live from NPR News in Washington, I'm Janine Herbst. Searchers on the Potomac River today continue to look for more victims of the American Airlines regional jet mid-air crash with a military helicopter outside Washington, D.C. Wednesday. 67 people were killed. Dozens of bodies have been recovered so far. 6 of those on board the plane were members of an elite figure skating club in Boston, along with parents and coaches. NPR's Becky Sullivan has more.
Wichita had just hosted the U.S. Figure Skating Championships, which ran through last Sunday. After the competition, U.S. Figure Skating had held a developmental camp for promising young skaters. 2 of those aboard the flight were teenagers who took part in the camp, said Doug Zegheib, the head of the Skating Club of Boston. They were flying home with their mothers.
I think our current members, leaders, management team, I don't know what the word is. Is it wrecked? Is it devastated? Folks are just stunned by this.
The 2 coaches were a husband and wife pair of Russian figure skaters, Evgenia Shishkova and Vadim Nomov. Besides the 6 affiliated with the Boston club, there were other skaters and family members on the plane, Zegheib said, more than a dozen in total. Becky Sullivan, NPR News, Washington.
On the campaign trail, Donald Trump swore he had nothing to do with the conservative policy agenda known as Project 2025, calling the proposals absolutely ridiculous. But as NPR's Franco Ordonez reports, just 2 weeks in office, many of those policies are now popping up in Trump's early executive actions, including
the order to pause federal funding. Of course, that order was rescinded, but the idea came from Project 2025. Also part of Project 2025 was the proposal to end birthright citizenship, as well as diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. Project 2025 also offers detailed plans to reshape the federal workforce, including instituting a hiring freeze and reclassifying workers.
NPR's Franco Ordonez reporting. President Trump's nominee to be Secretary of Health and Human Services, Robert F. Kennedy Jr., faced a second day of questions yesterday at his Senate confirmation hearing, again focusing on his views on vaccines, along with his previous comments about childhood vaccinations and race. NPR's Will Stone has more.
Senator Angela Alsobrooks, a Democrat from Maryland, confronted Kennedy on his past claims, which are recorded, that black people should have a different vaccine schedule than white people.
So what different vaccine schedule would you say I should have received?
Kennedy did not directly answer her question. He did seem to cite research from the Mayo Clinic that was also brought up in a movie produced by the anti-vaccine advocacy group Kennedy founded, which pushed the debunk claim between autism and vaccines. The author of the study at Mayo told NPR previously their research did show a more robust immune response in African Americans, but did not find evidence of increased side effects, and that any claim of increased vulnerability is not supported by the science.
You're listening to NPR News.
You're listening to WJCT News, 89.9 in Jacksonville. Good morning, I'm Stephen Ponson. It is now 9:04. The Jaguars have hired their guy to lead the defensive side of the ball. The Jags announced yesterday that they hired Anthony Campanile to turn around a defense that was one of the worst in the NFL last season. Campanile was an assistant coach with the Green Bay Packers in 2024, and before that was with the Miami Dolphins. This is one of the first hires for new head coach Liam Cohen, and it's considered a big one considering the poor play the defense had last season. The Florida Board of Governors meeting Thursday at the University of North Florida here in Jacksonville drew a number of United Faculty of Florida members upset with the path they see higher education headed down. UNF professor Matt Leon was among those gathered outside the Delaney Student Union while the board met inside. His message, stop attacking course content, consider DEI, diversity, equity, and inclusion.
Really all diversity, equity, and inclusion content is making sure that if you are that veteran with a disability, if you are a first-generation college student, if you are someone that comes from a small town and is now living in corporate America, that you have the tool set you need to navigate that and succeed.
The Florida Board of Governors oversees the state's 12 public universities. Many of the schools have already started removing the general education designation from so-called DEI courses, which union members worry will result in lower student enrollment. Highs in the lower 80s today in Jacksonville with sunny skies.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Doris Duke Foundation, which aims to support the well-being of people and the planet for a more creative, equitable, and sustainable future. And listeners like you who donate to this NPR station.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning, and welcome to First Coast Connect. I'm Ann Schindler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review. Among our topics, Florida lawmakers transform a special session into a political cage match. Jacksonville's city attorney catches flack after deciding a 50-year-old budget tradition isn't legal. A new era of federal enforcement worries immigrants and nonprofits. A billion-dollar jail gets mayoral support, and JEA's former CEO reports to prison. To talk about all that and more, I'm joined by David Bauerlein, Metro reporter at the Florida Times-Union. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Ann.
A.G. Gancarski, Northeast Florida correspondent at Florida Politics. Good morning, A.G.
Howdy, Ann.
Katie Jeffries, Good Morning Jacksonville anchor at First Coast News. Good morning, Katie.
Hey, good morning.
And Obi Umunna, longtime campaign manager and attorney here in Jacksonville. Good morning.
Good morning, Ann.
Nice to see you. So before we get started on the topics, AG, I just want to ask you about the last 24 to 48 hours in your life. You were actually at Reagan National Airport when that tragic plane crash happened.
That's correct. And I've got a column in Jacksonville today that's coming out, I believe, Monday, documenting this in full. But yeah, I was on a plane waiting to get out. They told us over the intercom it's going to be a 20 to 30-minute delay. They told us we could or could not deplane, depending on if we wanted to or not. It was optional. Most people deplaned. Soon thereafter, like, well, it could be a few hours. Soon thereafter, your flight is canceled. The airport is closing. You've got a mad rush to, rebook flights. They booked me for another one that would have happened when the airport was closed. Flight, hotel voucher. Then it was kind of, it was like a disaster movie. Everybody's trying to get out of there. Everybody's trying to get to the hotel, but there's no buses. It was blockaded, so the Ubers and the cabs were just driving through. They wouldn't pick you up.
Interesting.
It took me 2 hours to get ground transport, and there was like some road cabbie that got through somehow. I don't know. Maybe he had connections, but he got through, and he had like 10 of us in this little van. I was in the front seat of the van with my baggage on top of me. Takes me to the place I hauled in. Magically, the voucher for hotel did work. Got out the next morning via Dulles. But
so it's sort of like in a bubble, though, right? I mean, initially, you weren't really aware what was happening, even though you were there at the airport.
Yeah, and that's the thing. That's the thing. Like I talk about this in the column some, but there was a TV at the bars next to the gates, and they had the news on for a bit, and then they turned it to basketball. You go down the baggage claim. Sitting down at the baggage claim, and they're playing easy listening. You're listening to 101 Strings and Longin Symphonette and Montavani. And, it's like nothing's happening. You've got cleaning people just basically going half speed, the socially cleaning like the carousels. The baggage claim noise went. And meanwhile, everybody outside the airport knew that all heck was breaking loose, knew exactly what happened. But if you're inside the airport, you're insulated. It made me think of what happened to people during, say, 9/11, where the world is watching all of this happen, but you got some guy in a building that, is burning who's, 5 minutes from death, thinking about his fantasy football lineup.
I mean, it sort of reminds us a little bit of Asheville, when you have that disaster zone and when you're in it, and without the communication, you don't know what the rest of the world knows about what's happening.
Right, and it's a very managed communication. The governmental entities were no real help. The airline was just looking to do reputational management, so want to keep people calm. But the price of that is that people weren't prepared for what really was going on.
Yeah.
I had loved ones reach out, and they thought I was in serious danger. And meanwhile, I was just like, well, I've got probably going to be here for a while. I need to get some food, so I got some cookies from like a place because everybody was just so calm.
Yeah.
But it's like it was a calmness that didn't serve the people there. So, yeah, look for my column on Monday. I'll talk about this a lot more.
We're glad to have you back safe. I want to move on now, David, to a question that began with a pay raise for a local trash hauler, but it has now emerged into a major fight between the mayor and the city council. Catch us up on what's happening with this waste hauler contract and how that got to a resolution pending about the abilities of the city attorney.
Right, so basically City Council awarded a pay increase for this waste hauler, Meridian Waste, far above what Mayor Donna Deegan wanted. Mayor Donna Deegan then vetoes the legislation, the first veto of her term. City Council overrides the veto. We think, okay, that's it. It's done. It's moving forward. But the general counsel, who is the top lawyer over the entire consolidated city government, issues a binding legal opinion this week that says, no, City Council violated the city charter by approving the legislation with this much higher rate increase than what the mayor wanted. And so now the City Council has come back, and a couple of council members have filed legislation to say they've lost faith in the general counsel. They don't trust him. And he's basically carrying water for the mayor in the guise of giving legal advice, which the Jacksonville Bar Association then came out with a very strong statement saying, that's a baseless charge. You haven't shown anything that shows he didn't act in good faith. You know, there's one attorney at least at this table, and the joke is you get 10 attorneys around the table and you'll have 10 different opinions. You know, it's some subjectivity comes into interpreting the law, but that's where it stands. And it's, you know, maybe for people who just want the waste collected, the good news is Meridian's still out there picking up your waste. They've done a good job. They seem to get a lot of praise from the city for that. But within City Hall, it's a real shifting sort of, I don't want to say power play, but maybe it just shows how these different elements of the consolidated government of Jacksonville come in conflict. And in this case, at least, City Council feels like it got short end of the stick.
Obi, to David's point, you know, you are an attorney. This attorney's decision, Michael Fackler, basically said what the council did was not aligned with basically the Constitution of the city charter. But it's something that they've been doing since 1976, and so he's saying this is not permitted, and the council's like, what are you talking about? We've been doing this forever.
Yeah, I mean, I think his ruling was, and I think this is why the Jacksonville bar kind of came in, was it was based on kind of a sound legal reasoning. He gave what he said was that city council should have never been doing this, is really what he said in his ruling, and he puts together a 4-part test, right, and says, this is how you know what function is for the executive or the legislative, and he goes through that test, and it's a sound reasoning. Now, like you said, other attorneys could disagree, but his reasoning to get to that point was based on kind of sound legal arguments. And I think, you know, we have seen in the past where people have disagreed with the general counsel on many occasions. I remember the half-cent tax debate where, you know, where the word shall was kind of more egregiously used in the past. I think that was probably a legal argument that didn't really hold water, and why you didn't see the legal community kind of come behind that. But this is one that he based, and I read his opinion based on strong legal argument, based on the history of, you know, American government and what those functions are, and that is his opinion. And I think, you know, the city council unfortunately did not like that, but they voted for him unanimously.
AG, this is about more than garbage, obviously, but we should say that the rate increase that Meridian was seeking and ultimately that the council awarded was to sort of bring parity to the other contract that the city had issued more recently to Waste Pro, you know, or Meridian saying, if we're not able to get the same rate as Waste Pro, we're going to lose business. Our employees are going to leave and go work for them. We should have, you know, even Steven here when it comes to waste hauling.
Yeah, and you know, you bring that up, and that's very prescient because it illustrates a number of problems with the arrangement in the city regarding waste collection. You know, first of all, like, why are we using these politically connected, lobbied up companies to haul garbage? Why isn't this just an in-house operation? You know, why do we have these companies with these six-figure CEOs basically fighting these turf wars like, you know, medieval, like, you know, feudalist leaders, trying to get these segments and basically whining and dining our legislators? That is one thing in play here. Another thing in play here, I want to bring up the Michael Fackler situation because it's key. This is something that I've meant to write a column about for a couple of weeks. I haven't gotten to for various reasons. You know, but, you know, really the city council did not vet Michael Fackler in terms of asking the questions of, you know, what does he want to do in this job? What is his attitude toward X, Y, and Z? And you know why? Because Randy DeFore was Donna Deegan's previous nominee. Randy DeFore was on the wrong side of them politically. They did everything they could to basically torch Randy DeFore, but is basically better the devil you know, because Michael Fackler is, in the grand tradition of recent general counsel of the city, the mayor's lawyer. And, you know, so this is really a situation where you have Salem, Diamond, these others. I've heard other prominent Republicans.
Council members, the ones you're talking about.
Yeah, exactly. You know, raising heck and getting out the pitchforks. But this is a problem of their own device. This is something they created. And the fact that they are looking to give Michael Fackler no confidence vote when they did a failed job of vetting him in the first place, It's a classic illustration of the myriad failures and fault lines of consolidated government in the city.
It is tough. And Katie, what AG is saying is true. This attorney position is tasked with representing all of the branches of government. And in the case of making a binding legal decision, saying like, this is something you're all going to follow, even though you disagree. It's not an easy position. And it has been controversial in the past. We noted there was the decision that a designated shall in the law could be interpreted as may. And a lot of people in the legal community did not agree with that decision.
Yeah, it's definitely a tough position for someone to have. I remember when we had the whole JEA situation going on, there was a lot with the city attorney in that situation as well. So it is a challenging position. But the fact that the bar came out and had such a strong opinion in support, I definitely think adds some weight to their argument.
I mean, it does and it doesn't, though, because, I mean, as we know about the legal community of the city, they're basically connected. So having, a group of some guy's friends come out and say this guy is cool, that's what the Jacksonville bar's endorsement really means.
Well, they're saying his decision was made without favor, that it was based on a good faith interpretation of the law as opposed to something that
I get that's what they're saying, but here's the thing, Ann, it's like, the city council and the mayor opted not to promote from within in the general council. There were multiple qualified candidates who had a lot of experience with charter, had a lot of experience with municipal code, which is a very esoteric thing, and it's something that is rooted in precedent. And they went outside twice. DeFore would have been outside higher. Fackler was way outside the system. And this is kind of what you get when you deviate from precedent. We act like precedent doesn't matter.
But I mean, isn't there some value in having somebody outside of the system now looking at the code and being like, hey, you guys have been doing it wrong for 50 years? I mean, David, if that's...
You tell me they're fighting about garbage.
Yeah, well, but I mean, having somebody that's willing to look critically at something that's always been done this way, it's always been done this way. But if it's not actually
And why not
legal,
elect the general counsel?
Well, that's another question. What do you say?
Yeah, I mean, there was a strong feeling among the mayor to have somebody come in from outside. And there was a tradition for a while that's how the general counsel was done. You would have somebody come in as a general counsel who was not a lifer in city government. They would come in for a few years and then go back out. Then we had a shift over the last maybe couple of decades where you had people who came in as general counsel and then stayed there for many, many years. And, look, there's pluses and minuses both. There is the idea of you bring in somebody who's got a fresh look, who's not beholden to the sort of office culture, to kind of take that view of things. Michael Fackler never worked in city government before, so AG's right. It's a very complicated set of laws and precedents and everything. I think one thing about the opinion is that it doesn't really go so far as to say, okay, this particular provision that's been in the code for 50 years, it's gone, take it out, it's not applicable. It kind of says, well,
yeah,
you can, there's a violation of the separation of church and state, of separation of powers that we can look at. If one side or the other feels like there is, it's kind of got a kind of
like
Goldilocks. It's not too hot, it's not too cold, it's just right. And so it's kind of like.
Well, he's saying that it's not, it doesn't comport with the ordinance, with the charter, but it'll be decided on a case-by-case basis.
Right. And I think that's one thing that maybe if you're a city council member, you're like, oh, does that mean that every time I want to amend the legislation filed by the mayor, I have to get the permission of the administration to do so, or else there might be a general counsel say, well, no, you can't do that, you're overreaching. It kind of leaves it sort of muddled.
Yeah, I think that's typical for a lot of legal opinions, though. They try to make it based on a particular set of facts and that limit to that. I do think, though, AG does bring a good point about the whole politics of this whole thing, right? I think you look at how we are how this process is working, and you have a person or a company that has signed up to do a job, and then they're coming back for a 30% increase. I think what I think is interesting here is that the city council and the mayor should be kind of working together to save the city money. And that's not what's happening. They're actually fighting on that particular point instead of working together and trying to get the vendor to do the job that they agreed to do.
I want to ask a couple of questions that we're getting on Facebook. One from Susan saying, when does the contract come up for bid again? It seems like a bad precedent to bid low and then ask for almost 30% increase. Tom on Facebook saying, The mishandling of trash collection in the city is all on the city council. Meridian does not provide all the services of the other waste haulers. They do not provide trash cans like the other companies, so they should be paid less. Likewise, the high cost is the failure of the city council to establish dumps within the city that would reduce garbage transit costs. I believe those contracts are every 3 years. Is
So
that?
it's a 6-year contract, and they're midway through the 6-year contract. And the idea is in every 3 years, they have this big rate review to say, okay, has something really happened that has changed things to the extent that it's justifiable? I mean, if the cost of gas tripled, then you go, well, you know what? When you bid, you thought gas was going to cost this much. Now it costs much more. It's justified for you to get a higher rate from us.
Do we know if Meridian provides a different level of service? Is that accurate in terms of providing the trash cans? I don't know.
It's the same. Well, they do the same level of service in terms of the frequency of pickup. They don't provide trash cans. I guess Waste Pro does, but that's the only difference that I'm aware of in their service levels.
Yeah, I mean, a trash can is $50 if you go to Home Depot or something like that. But here's the thing that's happened in the last 3 years: is currency devaluation. We had a pandemic. We had an infusion of money into the system. Donald Trump, Joe Biden signed off on these deals. What has that done? You go to the grocery store, you're spending $100 more than you did like a few years ago on the same stuff. You go to the fast food restaurant, you're paying more for less there. Item after item, cost. So you see that 29% number, and your jaw drops. But this again illustrates the problem with contracting these services out, bringing in this like multi-tiered system, basically making it something where it's a political game of competition, and the city not doing clean budgeting and bringing its central operation in-house.
Yeah.
And I've asked council members about that. They don't have a good answer to that. And another issue that's illustrated here that we didn't get into is the fact that the communication is not great between the mayor's office and city council. You hear people complain about the council liaisons. You hear people complain about Karen Bowling.
Is the council liaison Bill
Delaney, Scott Wilson? It's like, and you basically, you hear nice people, but in that case, and so the communication is not strong there. And I don't think this is going to be the last flashpoint over some ancillary issue. And really garbage collection is an ancillary issue, like the rate on this is an ancillary issue. But the fact that city resources, time, treasure, a part-time council devoting all of its energy and spinning its wheels on this, that's great, but we're going to get to a real crisis situation, and these guys are going to be tapped out because, they basically have been fulminating over, the general counsel they appointed, and the fact that the guy is really like the mayor's crony.
Right. Well, if you're just joining us, we're talking about the big stories of the week. I'm talking to David Bauerlein, A.G. Gancarski, Katie Jeffries, and Obi Umunna. And if you want to join the conversation, you can do so. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can email firstcoastconnect@wjct.org or reach out on social media. I want to move now to another topic that's been in the headlines at the state level. This is a sort of insurrectionist legislature, once very obedient, I guess would be the word, with our governor, defying him in a really extraordinary way, responding to his call for a special session that they didn't want, gaveling in, gaveling out immediately, and then saying we're going to go our own way, AG.
Yeah, this is kind of like the Four Horsemen turning on Ric Flair. It really is. It's hilarious because you've got basically who were at best like competing versions of the immigration bill. Ron DeSantis wanted about 20 different bills and a bunch of different things that effectively consolidated enforcement in his office, letting him play G.I. Joe, mini Trump, basically running these operations, talk about running deportations with state resources to other countries. That's unprecedented. Florida can fly them to Gitmo, sure, yeah. I mean, can't handle the property insurance crisis, but yeah, when it comes to international flights, why not trust Big Ron? The legislature has a different agenda. It's year 7 for Ron DeSantis. They are sick of looking at him. They're sick of him going on Fox News and doing his little 4-minute perfect scripted segments. So they brought out the Trump Act. And it does a lot of what Ron DeSantis wants, but with one caveat. It puts all of the power in the office of Agriculture Commissioner Wilton Simpson, who is no friend of Ron DeSantis's. They're kind of frenemies, and they've been that way the whole time. Back when Simpson was Senate president, DeSantis did a lot of high-profile vetoes of things that Wilton Simpson wanted in the budget, with Wilton Simpson standing right there behind him at the press conference. And it was like something out of The Godfather, 1 or 2, not 3, of course. But you look at that dynamic between these two men, between the Senate and the legislature, that was compelled to endorse Ron DeSantis for president in 2023 in the last day of legislative session. The Never Back Down pack. They took pledge cards, to the last day of session. Basically, you sign this pledge card, your stuff doesn't get vetoed. Quid pro quo. And Ron DeSantis, of course, $160 million later, 6 months later, running for president on the taxpayer dime, neglecting what's happening in the state to do so, going to Iowa and kissing up to everybody he could in 99 counties during the full Grassley. Ron DeSantis flamed out. So now they all had to crawl back to Trump. And, as we go into this last year's Ron DeSantis, they're trying to prove he's a lame duck. They have passed a bill, the Trump Act that I mentioned, and it's going to be vetoed as soon as they basically transmit it over. So the legislators slow-walking that. Ron DeSantis keeps going on Fox News, Fox Radio, every podcast he can. All of his little cronies that propped him up in late 2023, early 2024, interviewing him, letting him ask him, "Gee, Ron, you're so great. Why aren't they going along with you?" They aren't going along with you because they're sick of you.
I want to ask Obi, we got an email from Ricardo saying, does anyone see Susie Wiles' hand behind the Tallahassee slapdown, or whatever the legislature versus the governor episode is called? Susie Wiles, of course, is the the president's chief of staff, but used to work for Ron DeSantis before they had a major falling out.
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for Susie. I can tell you though, there's a quote is that they love you, then they hate you, and then they love you again. And he is in his hate period right now. I think anyone who kind of knows, and AG can attest to this, that Ron DeSantis had not made a lot of friends in Tallahassee at all, regardless. And I think once they realized that he no longer holds that power over them, they were able to strike back. I don't think they needed Susie Wiles' help to do that. I think they were ready and willing to kind of to get underneath his hand there, and how he did things in Tallahassee wasn't very collaborative, even with his own party. And I think people were tired of that, and they were ready to get out underneath his hand. And I think they know that Trump actually holds the power and that Ron DeSantis doesn't. And so they know that they're going to cater to him.
Katie, at bottom, we're talking about this immigration law that is, likely going to be vetoed, but some version of it is surely going to be passed. The legislature and the governor both wanting to adhere as faithfully as they can to the priorities of the new president. One of the things that was proposed in this Trump Act that was approved by the legislature was requiring government employees to, quote, cooperate to the fullest extent possible with federal immigration enforcement officers. And one thing that the Democrats raised as a concern was, who are we wanting to be, cooperating to the fullest extent possible? Does that include social workers? Does that include school resource officers? Who do we want to embolden to sort of take on the mantle of enforcing immigration law?
Yeah, we had a story this week. We spoke with a local immigration attorney who said she has been inundated with calls of people worried about what this will mean for them. What questions do they have to answer? Should they even send their kids to school? Should there be concern? So there is so much, I feel like, uneasiness within the community, especially those who are wondering if they're going to get rounded up and deported. I mean, it's sad to hear all of these stories, and especially to hear from immigration attorneys who say that they're basically, working 24/7 trying to answer so many people who have questions about what's going to happen.
Yeah, I mean, questions without maybe clear answers was sort of the theme that emerged, I think, on a lot of fronts this week. Something else that we want to get into is what happened with the issuance and then the rescission of this federal funding pause, federal grants and federal loans. And that was initially putting all kinds of local nonprofits in a tailspin. And then, they're somewhat back to normal, but
still very unclear. I've talked to quite a few, even like crime programs, who are getting their money. Project Cold Case is one of them, through VOCA grants and things like that, where it's just uncertain what's going to happen and what does this mean for so many programs in our community. Will they get that money? Is the check going to clear? Is it going to come back? it's just there's so much that seems up in the air.
David, what does that kind of uncertainty translate to from a political standpoint? It makes even people who are in support of the policies might have some concerns about just the ability to clearly lead and advise and govern their constituents.
Yeah, it raises questions about whether the Trump administration can govern, which was a big criticism in its first term, was that there was so much uncertainty, policies would change, there would be big initiatives announced, they weren't followed through. I mean, that's a lot of government. It's just the nuts and bolts aspect of putting an agenda in place. I mean, a lot of it's just been by executive orders where you just write something up and then say it's done. And it's not done because then the federal courts are going to get involved. And is it constitutional or not? Has he overstepped his authority? So there's a lot of uncertainty then out there about whether you can plan into the future and whether the funding's actually going to be there or not. So I think that's a legitimate concern going forward. My sense is the Trump administration and Trump likes to sort of leave people uncertain, kind of govern with surprise as part of his method of operation. But it has its downside, too, if you're the local governments or state governments that depend on that funding.
Obi, you are a Democratic political consultant. You worked for Kamala Harris's campaign. Do Democrats see any opening in this federal funding issue in particular? It seemed like kind of the first opportunity where they might not claim a win, but at least not sort of be constantly on their back foot.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is an opportunity, and you can see the response that this was an opportunity to kind of protest and see if and get a small victory by getting the memo rescinded, and then you're starting to see the funding slowly come back. I think what the Democrats are doing now as well is saying, like, this is the uncertainty that is going to happen. Domestic violence places, all different like essential services are going to be shut off for funds that have already been approved by the previous Congress and president. And I think they are showing that, and they're talking that they need to do more kind of getting out and letting people understand what exactly is happening. Because I think people's minds shut off a little bit after election. But I think now seeing the actual real results coming back home, meaning services getting shut off and things that are happening, I think they need to really continue to work. But this was a small victory.
The notifications that went out, too, to some 2 million federal employees about, we've got until February 6th, AG to resign, and you'll get the severance. Otherwise, you may just lose your job. We know that those have been going to people in the local community, including, in our military. And it does create a lot of questions for people about how to proceed and how to make up their mind that quickly.
Well, I mean, a big priority of the administration is return to office, basically. Get people back into the seats rather than working remote. And you can kind of understand why, because if you look at something like, government agency and you've got somebody working from home, then what you're dealing with basically is, they're not accountable. The supervisors are not accountable in the same way that's happening elsewhere. And, so I see the point. Elections have consequences. This is one consequence. And, the federal workforce, it's large, it's unaccountable, it's not necessarily efficient in many ways, as we see with things like FEMA. We see things like the Department of Education, the way they handled student loans under the last administration, a number of different issues. So you have an election, you elect a guy, all of that. But coming back to this issue of, funding, this illustrates why you would want a functional state government that isn't, fighting about, an immigration special session bill. This is committee weeks. They should have a plan basically to backfill for local and state agencies, city council, instead of fighting about how much they like Michael Fackler doing their slam book. Maybe they should figure out, how they can basically fund these operations in the city, create backstops and subsidiary governments. And this is kind of the thing. Everybody wants to give the hot quote. Everybody wants to get on the news. Everybody wants to go to the next level. Great. Well, you know what? When the federal government decides that they're not going to come through in the way they were before, you've got to figure out a way to actually replace these operations, or find a way to backfill via socializing government in a way that you say you don't want to. So this is something where local and state governments need to step up amid the uncertainty from Washington.
I want to take a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Good morning. What we've been hearing about overall, whether it be local, state, or federal government, is a lot of chaos created. 49.8% of people voted for this. And so, unfortunately, things are going to need to play out so people realize these are consequences of your actions. Some of us are going to be collateral damage. But I want us to just not focus. When you're over there looking at the chaos to the right, you don't know what they're doing to the left. Like a case in point, this morning, Washington Post, the acting Treasury Secretary is resigning because Elon Musk has been trying to access the Treasury payment system, which that was refused. So we need to figure out how, as an unelected bureaucrat, yes, local governments need to support things, but let's not overlook the billionaires about to ravage the government for their own ends. We need to be paying attention to that instead of all the squabbling at the local level, because when you turn around, they will have taken the money from the system and none of us will have any access to any governmental money. Thank you.
Thank you, Linda. Appreciate it. If you're just joining us, we're talking about the big headlines of the week with our panel of analysts and reporters. You can join our conversation. Give us a call at 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or reach out on social media. I want to shift gears, Katie, to a topic that got some attention this week. It is a partnership between the Jacksonville Sheriff's Office and some faith leaders and churches in the area, basically trying to create a safe space for people who want to get out of the gang life. I want to just hear a little bit from TK Waters, the sheriff, when he was introducing this initiative, and then we'll talk about it.
My deepest thanks to our partners for doing these grassroots innovative work that truly has given so many individuals who were on their way to prison or the grave a meaningful alternative.
So, Katie, tell us a little bit about what the vision is, how this would work.
Sure. So it's called Operation Safe Passage, and it's basically a way for people who may be involved in a gang or in the gang lifestyles to kind of have an off-ramp and to find a way to safely leave those gangs. And they're working with churches and faith leaders to be able to do this. So they opened up kind of the first place, a designated place called Builders of Faith Community Church on the West Side, where people can go if you're trying to leave that lifestyle, which can be a scary time, can be a dangerous time for someone leaving a gang. Talk to someone who has been trained in this program, and then they can help this person leave the gang, maybe get a GED, maybe help relocate their family, but find a safe way to leave a gang. And this kind of builds upon what we have seen with dropping of the murder rate last year, where they worked with faith leaders, they worked with community groups to bring down crime, and this feels like kind of an extension of that, finding ways to help people leave gangs.
And so this is like a designation that a church gets. They're planning on having other churches join this effort, but there is some training involved, right?
There is training. It is volunteer-based, and he said it did not cost the city anything. Or they're not paying these people anything. It's volunteer-based. Right now, there are 16 congregations that are specifically trained for this, and their goal is to get to 50.
Yeah. So this, David, is part of a larger, longer initiative in terms of trying to, reduce the gang violence in Jacksonville and kind of take care of that problem. But this is a sheriff that has, leaned on the faith community in a lot of ways and tried to sort of integrate that mission and that, support base in a way to assist JSO in the work that they do.
Yeah, it's the PI method, prevention, intervention, enforcement. This is certainly intervention part, and certainly reaching out to the faith-based community is kind of in keeping, I think, with Sheriff Waters and kind of his approach. I don't know why they wouldn't want to have Operation Safe Passage be in other locally based organizations in the community. This may or may not be where someone leaving a gang would want to turn first. I don't know what their backgrounds might be in terms of what would be the most likely place they would want to go. If they're looking for somebody to provide the assistance that Katie's talking about, if a church could do that, but maybe other organizations could do it as well. But it is certainly commendable that the churches are willing to do this, and I assume a lot of it would depend on how good the training is, but if it's good training and it's good organization, you have to think that maybe there's just a moment, a time in anyone's life where they go, you know what, I want to make a change. And if there's somebody there in that moment they can turn to, that's a good thing.
Yeah, Obi, what about that? I mean, we know that very often people get out of gangs simply because they age out of gangs. You know, there's sort of this period where young people are more prone to kind of get involved in things that could be risky or violent. And a lot of times when people stop living the gang life, it's because they've gotten kind of older, they might have kids, and their priorities have changed. So how does this, avenue out, who does that speak to?
Well, I mean, I think this is a great program. I think hopefully there's enough buy-in for it. I think it shows that we can't just arrest ourselves out of these problems, that we need to do more on a holistic view for the city to provide those spaces. And I agree with David that I hope that at some point expand it to maybe other community groups as well. But I do think it goes to people who are at some point thinking that they want to get out, right? And I think sometimes they don't know how to. And I think, or they don't have a place, or they don't know what they're going to do next. And this seems like a program that gives them opportunities and gives them choices to leave that life behind. And so I think hopefully there is more buy-in, and hopefully it is successful.
AG, this is coming at a time when there is a lot of emphasis now on the need for a new jail. The mayor this week basically co-signed that as a shared priority that she has with the sheriff, as well as additional officers. They weren't always on the same page when she was running for office, but she seems to have largely embraced a lot of the priorities that he has, including this $1 billion new jail project.
Right. And I mean, this mayor has been very aggressive in capital investment. I mean, as we know, we're going to defer the payment of the old pension plans so we can build a stadium for the Jaguars. And this is kind of the same thing. And it's like my question with all of these things, and we do need a jail. We've talked about the current jail basically being a human rights violation and a class action lawsuit waiting to happen on the show. I've said that. So I understand that the need for a jail. What I don't understand is the payment mechanism. How do we pay for this without raising millage rates? How do we pay for any of these things? You've got Matt Carlucci with a proposal to raise the trash fee. That's a regressive proposal. You do something like raise the millage rates, and who's going to be punished most? People. This is ironic, but people with like lower valued homes who can't, not somebody in Ortega or San Marco on the river who can basically go to the council and say, I gave you $5,000 for your pack. Can you help me get this down? So these are the questions that come into play. Who will be punished? Who will be taxed? It will be the shrinking middle-class homeowners. The people who are basically being pushed out by, the JWB and outlets like that, by the various luxury apartment builders, building these like 4x4 construction, clapboard, plywood, dream factories at $2,000 a month rent where nobody can see any equity. So the devil's in the details. The city's deferred a lot of spending for a long time. And I don't think there's appetite in the city council to raise millage. So yeah, you want a jail. I want a Lexus. I don't want to pay for it. And I don't think city council really wants to pay for this jail.
Katie, I want to shift gears and just touch on another headline from this week. The former CEO of JEA, Aaron Zahn, reporting to jail at long last. That it was months ago that he was sentenced for these corruption charges, and many years ago that they stem from 2019. What do we know about, what kind of term he's going to be serving? I know that the Department of Justice doesn't give out mugshots, so it's not like we have any, physical evidence of his being there.
I believe he turned himself in South Carolina, and I think it was a 4-year term. So I haven't seen the information on yet where specifically he's going to be. Maybe you all know that exactly. Edgefield. But so start a 4-year term. It was delayed, like you said, because he was supposed to report earlier this year. They said he had hurricane damage on his home, so the judge pushed it back to January. But he turned himself in South Carolina and is now in custody.
Imagine, you basically do the biggest grift in city history, and they tell you, hey, take 6 months and deal with contractors and get your home fixed up. So when you get out in 2.5 years for good behavior, because of course he's going to pull that, you have a nice place to return to. Imagine that. If you're a low-level criminal, do you get 6 months to basically settle your affairs, catch up on your binge watching? No. But Aaron Zahn, the chief grifter in city history, the mastermind of a scheme that basically would have taken the city utility and put $40 million in his pocket, gets 2.5 years and gets to report 6 months after sentencing. What a crock.
Not everybody is quite that animated, but there certainly is a sense, David, that, is this punishment, does it fit the crime?
Right. So it's a 4-year term. I think the prosecution said he probably served 85% of that with time off for good behavior. And then, obviously, AG's point spot on. This is a white-collar crime. White-collar criminals are treated differently than a violent crime is in terms of, having 6 months. He was sentenced at the end of July. He's starting now at the end of January. So 6 months, and then, you had hurricane damage. So, okay, you can have another 3 months before you actually have to report.
It doesn't de-incentivize the grift, though. It's like if I was somebody looking to basically take advantage of a city government as clueless and basically eyes closed as this one, and I said, hey, I could make $40 million, but the risk is spending 30 months in, white-collar, like volleyball and weightlifting jail, sign me up, deal me in. Let me do the grift.
Obi, I mean, the federal sentencing guidelines, though, are sort of driven by, established norms. Judges try to be, even across districts and across the country, really, in terms of how they mete out punishment.
Yeah, I mean, I think he's going to get what every kind of criminal gets. I do.
Oh, you mean of that level?
Of that level. I think. I mean, he hadn't done any crimes before that we know of, and so I think that is kind of how he's going to be treated. I did want to say one thing about this JEA, and kind of going back to this other caller, is that this is a process that people, if you would have talked at the beginning of this, that they were for sure that JEA would have been sold. And I think people protested, great journalism, sprinkling a little bit of incompetence from them, and now we're able to keep it. And I think if people are frustrated with what's going on, I think they have the opportunity to fight back.
It would have been sold without the performance unit plan, the fact that they were trying to give themselves a 10% VIG. That's why it wasn't sold.
We're going to have to leave it there. David Bauerlein, A.G. Gancarski, Katie Jeffries, Obi Umunna, thank you all so much for being here. Really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. Up next, later in an age of fast and digital, we'll tell you about a local photography group that's going slow and analog.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Car accidents happen too often for your family to go unprotected. Uninsured motorist insurance. When you need it, will you have it?
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. Douglas Anderson School of the Arts presents Extravaganza, Saturday, February 1st at the Moran Theater, a night of artistry and Broadway-style entertainment in music, dance, and theater. Tickets through Ticketmaster. Douglas Anderson School of the Arts.
Have you seen people on social media talking about going to Turkey? He really needs to go to Turkey. Oh, he must have gone to Turkey. Oh, Turkey really ate with this one. Men are going to Turkey, and they're not going to see the Hagia Sophia. We're going to look into what's going on in Istanbul on the next Today Explained.
Tonight at 6:30 here on WJCT News 89.9.
On the next Florida Roundup, most middle and high schools are supposed to change the time of their first bell beginning with the next school year. The mandate was supposed to help students get more sleep, but lawmakers may hit snooze over concerns like after-school activities and getting stuck in more traffic. Regardless of what sound wakes you up, what time should school start and why? Email us radio@thefloridaroundup.org. This is the sound of my alarm. I'm Tom Hudson. Join us Friday noon until 1.
A painstaking investigation begins into a midair crash that killed all those on board a flight from Kansas and the crew of an Army helicopter. Elsewhere in D.C.,
frankly, you frighten people.
Senators grill RFK Jr. at his confirmation hearing, and millions of federal workers are given just days to decide if it's time to resign. More on this week's Friday News Roundup next time on 1A.
Today, starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Well, a new community of artists is developing in St. Augustine. Photographers trading digital editing apps for the darkroom. Here to explain the allure is Shannon Fitzpatrick and Zach Sawyer, both local photographers and co-founders of the St. Augustine Analog Club. Welcome.
Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for having us.
So what inspired you to start the Analog Club? I know you have a third member that began it with you, Justin Evans, but how did you decide to do this, and kind of what is the appeal?
Well, Zach and I, we met over Instagram. We were both sharing our film photography there. We started going on little photo walks just to connect. In time, we realized there's probably more of us out there who would like to connect with other film photographers, so we decided to start this club, and so far we've met a number of photographers from St. Augustine, Jacksonville, Orlando, Gainesville have all come, so it's been great.
So you're posting your work on Instagram. How is it clear to anybody that what you're doing is, you know, an analog film process as opposed to something that you've done with a digital camera or an iPhone?
A lot of times it's through captions. We'll mention that it was done through film, but oftentimes you can see just by looking at the picture that you can tell the difference between the film and digital just by the look of it.
Tell us how.
Often what appeals to me personally, I like the colors that you can find from film that might naturally come from the scans, whereas if you were doing it digitally, you'd have to edit it to get those kinds of colors. Certain types of grain as well. Sometimes you can see the frame of the film scan, the border around the film. So there's little ways that you can make it look a little more film and less digital, but oftentimes I will mention, though, that it's film when I post things.
There is sort of a movement among people, millennial and younger, for this kind of nostalgic, sensibility. I've heard a story recently about kids who are returning to typewriters. Analog film, I thought we'd kind of left that behind, but you, I guess, got to it when you discovered some cameras after your parents or your grandparents passed away.
Yeah, when we were going through my grandparents' closet, we found their old Canon AE1, which is a camera that I now know, as we've talked to older people who have been in our club, they say, that was my first camera that I got started on. So now here I am, years and years after they probably got started on that, also getting started on the Canon AE1. So I shoot with that still, primarily. And it's just been, I used to shoot digitally only, and I hate editing photos. And with film, there's very little editing. Film just really handles light very well. It's just, there's different sorts of films, obviously. So right now in my camera, I'm shooting with a Kodak Portra, and it shoots, a certain look. Like Zach was saying, some people spend a lot of time editing to get their digital photos to look like the photos that come out of that film.
We're also accustomed to taking multiple photos. When you're working with a limited number of pictures on film, we've got exposures that are 24 or 36. I mean, you've got that and nothing else, and you find it makes you more kind of intentional in your work or
For sure.
methodical?
Definitely, especially thinking about that every single picture you take costs money as well is another factor of it. But I think it puts a lot more intention into the pictures. You focus a lot more on the composition itself, and you focus a lot more on the scene as opposed to the settings on your camera. So you're not taking a picture and then looking at the screen and messing with these buttons and adjusting light. It's all both based upon the composition of what's in the picture.
It's interesting too. I would guess if you're taking a picture and you're not immediately then turning your attention to the digital format and the edit and modifying it, that you're kind of remaining a little more sort of present in the scene that you're in.
Yeah, absolutely. When I shoot people, I will say, we have X amount of shots, and they're going to turn out great. I promise you that. But there's no going back and saying, oh, can we retake that? I don't like the way my face looks in that or whatever. And it's exciting to get your scans back or your negatives back and seeing that they actually did turn out well.
I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, one of the things that I remember from, working in the photography space and in college, taking classes was, developing a film is a huge part about it. I mean, processing it and then making the the prints. Are you working out of dark rooms, or how do you get your film and then process your pictures?
Typically, I personally go down to a lab in Ormond Beach called Reformed Film Lab because they're kind of the closest lab to where I live in St. Augustine that I can go to. When I first kind of got into film, I was in a high school that did have a full dark room, so that was kind of my introduction to film, was through a dark room. Around here, though, there's not really that access to a dark room. There are some people that are doing it themselves in their homes, kind of setting up little dark rooms in their bathrooms or in their closets, but as far as a community dark room, we don't necessarily have that space here in town.
Is that something you would like? I mean,
We would love that.
Yeah, it would be
There's
definitely.
been whispers of people wanting to open one locally, and we really hope they can achieve that because we would greatly benefit.
The interest is there.
Would be cool. I do, for people who are doing it in their home, I would just say that, there are limits on what you can put in a drain. I mean, there's certain processes and chemicals that require.
Yes.
So how could people get involved if they want to know more about the Analog Club?
Yeah, we have an Instagram account. It is Analog Club STA, as in St. Augustine, and you can find us there. We actually just announced our next event that we are having in March. It's a spring showcase. The people can come out to Spinster Abbott's in Uptown St. Augustine. They will be able to vote on their favorite photos that are submitted from local photographers. It's going to be great. Prizes are also going to be donated by Reformed Film Lab. And tomorrow, actually, we have a photo walk. We're going to be meeting in Uptown St. Augustine and walking around St. Augustine with our cameras.
All right. Well, it's so nice to meet you guys. Thank you for coming on the program, and
Thanks
good
so
luck with
much
the
for
club.
having us.
Thank you.
All right. And thank you for listening. That's our program for today. Join us Monday when we discuss the resurgence of the historic East Side with Executive Director of the Florida Avenue Main Street Incorporated. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
Supporter of First Coast Connect, Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjacks.com. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. SJC Cultural Events presents indie rock band Modest